our business or in private life, we may have signed contracts that we can no longer honor due to the COVID-19 outbreak. This could be for payments, leases or services. To help us navigate that space then and the legalities therein, I'm joined by Kyle Torrington, who is co-founder of legal document company Hello Contract. Kyle, thank you. I read your piece where you're sort of navigating the tricky waters of contract law in a time when, you may not be able, whether you like it or not, you're just not able to honor contracts. And key within that is this concept of force majeure. What is that, and how does it feature in contract law?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon to you and your viewers. Essentially, and a lot of contracts do have, or properly worded contracts do have this clause, a force majeure or an event of force majeure, which are a set of circumstances which might be beyond the reasonable control of one or both parties, which might prevent that party from performing its obligations in terms of a contract, such as making a payment or providing some form of other service. And in doing so, might delay the performance, number one, and prevent them from ever being able to arrive at a situation where they can perform correctly in terms of the contract, and as such need to impose a notice raising this event of force majeure and advising that they cannot perform in terms of the contract. Now, in raising an event of force majeure, this simply means that they cannot perform, the obligations are suspended for the time of force majeure, and until the event is overcome, all obligations will be suspended. In some instances, it might happen that if it goes on for 2 or 3 months or whatever time period the contract provides, the contract is then automatically terminated, or at the notice of one or both of the parties, the contract is then terminated. Now, a lot of informal sectors might not have this sort of a contract, or a contract which includes a force majeure clause. In such situations, you could, for example, have an instance of supervening impossibility of performance. You've got a concept known as vis majeure or vis major, where essentially a force which is beyond the reasonable control, very similar to force majeure, beyond the reasonable control of one or both of the parties, prevents a party from performing in terms of the contract. Generally, it's a lot harder to prove this, and it's the parties looking to invoke this vis majeure provision to enforce or to say or to prove that they can't perform in terms of the agreement. It's a lot harder to prove, and unless... Sorry, are you looking to cut in there? My apologies.
No, not at all. Kyle, so in the context right now where many small and medium enterprises are facing this unprecedented time where, many of the contracts that they have will simply not be possible to honor, whether it be for delivery of printer cartridges or, delivery of other consumables to big companies that they supply. What's your advice? What should they be doing right now?
Sure. Well, number one, look to see whether you've got a force majeure clause in your contract. If you are delivering items to big entities, they most likely would have provided you with a contract which might include that. If it doesn't contain that clause, then look at whether or not you can impose this common law provision of supervening impossibility of performance. In each instance, as soon as this arises, what my suggestion would be is to notify your customer that you are not able to perform in terms of it. Give the reason as to why. And in instances where you're not able to prove sufficiently that there is an event of vis major, or you don't have a force majeure clause, it might unfortunately come down to good old-fashioned negotiating, because everyone's going through the struggle at this particular point. It's affected everyone. So I think the solidarity that comes from it is that a lot of businesses will be far more willing to relax on a lot of their payment or delivery terms. So failing both of those two instances that I mentioned before, vis majeure and force majeure, look at just entering into discussions and seeing whether you can delay your performance until the lockdown is over.
And Kyle, part of the challenge right now that many businesses will be dealing with is how to deal with issues around their human resources and people that they employ. No money is coming in for many businesses, and some people may be looking to quote-unquote restructure and the possibility of letting people go. Of course, we are trying to mitigate that through various interventions. But what are the legalities there? Can a person who finds themselves in in that tight spot of not being able to deliver on their contracts and hence not earning an income, let go of people?
Sure. Well, firstly, if you're looking at retrenchments, it has to be as a last resort. So you made every effort to accommodate for that employee in one way, sort of form. Introduced, I think, over the course of the last couple of days by the UAF in conjunction with the Department of Labour is the National Disaster Fund, or the National Disaster Benefit. So in instances where you might have to temporarily lay off staff, where they're still employed by you, but, for example, during the duration of the lockout, the employer is able to apply to the UIF for this particular national disaster benefit. And I think it amounts to 3,500 Rand per month for the duration of how long these employees are laid off for, or a maximum of 3 months, whichever is shorter. So that's number one. Secondly, there's also, for example, if you need to look at shortening work time, you can certainly try and do so. There might be provisions in labour contracts which permit the shortening of work time, but you cannot shorten work time and also reduce salary unless there are provisions in the employment contract which permit for that. In instances where you have no choice, the employee can then apply to the UIF for their ordinary UIF benefits. So there are a number of reliefs for small businesses and their employers here. There's also, for example, the debt relief fund, where, for example, if you're able to, or if you've got existing debts, the government, through an application process, is able to assist with some of that debt relief. There's also the Solidarity Fund, which has been set up, which, although I don't know too much of the intricacies of it, is there to also aid certain small businesses. So there are measures. How effective they'll be, I really don't know.
All right, Kyle, thank you so much. Because of the Skype quality line there, we're going to have to leave it there. But I do encourage people to actually look out for Kyle Torrington's blog about the whole issue of what you do in a situation where you have a contract as a business to supply, to give a particular performance, to pay people to deliver a service, and now you simply cannot because everything has ground to a halt because of COVID-19. So he's from a company called Hello Contract. So I would say just Google that and Google the whole concept of force majeure.